Hello, and welcome to our Diversity Inclusion Speaker Series. Kids Sport is really pleased to present this, and this is episode 6. We are grateful to the Calgary Flames Foundation for their support of this ongoing discussion series, and Kids Sport felt that this is a really important opportunity to support education and the responsibility to ensure that the clubs that our kids play in have an understanding of diverse backgrounds and experiences of where the kids come from, and to create safe, welcoming, and inclusive environments. So we've been hosting these discussions monthly since March, and the one today we'll introduce is around girls and women and thinking about how we can better include girls in our sport opportunities. We want to begin today by acknowledging that the territory that we're on, or I'm coming to you from today, is that of the Wasanich, Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples. And that is where I've been really grateful to make my home over the last many years. And it is my responsibility as a settler living on these lands, to continue to learn and understand the origin stories and the histories of Indigenous peoples and our relationships as we go forward together. And on Truth and Reconciliation Day on the 30th, I had the incredible opportunity to take my daughter to the South Island powwow, which was hosted by the Songhees Nation, and to experience the culture, the dance, the drumming, and just embed ourselves in that culture and the community that built. So really beautiful opportunity as we explore so many different things that are happening in our communities and start to understand some of the histories that are influencing that. So today's discussion is going to include 3 panelists, and I'll be introducing them in just a moment. My name's Andrea Carey. I'm the Chief Inclusion Officer with Inclusion Incorporated. I'm very pleased to be your moderator and host today and to take you through this session. I identify by the pronouns she, her, hers, and elle, and welcome you to use those throughout the discussion. We do have a chat function today, so please feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat as we go through. There's also a Q&A function, so you will monitor both. So if, as I said, questions, comments in either, and we will look forward to hearing from you and addressing your questions as we go through the session. So without any further delay, I'm really pleased to introduce our 3 panelists for this Girls in Sport session today. And the first panelist I'm going to introduce is Natasha Servo. Natasha works for Canadian Women in Sport. Natasha is the Marketing and Communications Coordinator at Canadian Women in Sport. Her career in sports began during her post-secondary degree at Toronto Metropolitan University's Sport Media program. And her journey in the sports industry has involved organizations such as U Sports, CBC, and the Coaches Association of Ontario. Natasha has a passion for storytelling and championing women leaders in all levels of sport. Welcome, Natasha. Lovely to have you. Our second panelist is Lindsay Wright. Lindsay is the Executive Director of In Motion Network. Lindsay, who goes by the pronouns of she, her, has been working in the sport, physical activity, and recreation sector for 20 years, with a variety of additional experiences as a participant, athlete, volunteer, coach, and parent in the sector. As the Executive Director of In Motion Network, Lindsay continues to work to support the organization's mission, where equity is a fundamental to ensuring that women and girls have the opportunity to meaningfully participate in all of their diversity as leaders, coaches, officials, athletes, participants, and administrators in Alberta's sporting, recreation, and physical activity systems. Welcome, Lindsay. Great to see you. And our third panelist today is Sean Botterill. Sean is the president of Centennial Little League, which is based in the north central area of Calgary and provides baseball programs for youth ages 4 to 16. Over the last couple of years, Centennial Little League has worked towards increasing the number of girls who play baseball, not just within their territorial boundaries, but across the entire baseball community. They've taken a multifaceted approach to this challenge, working towards providing opportunities for players, coaches, and volunteers in the intermediate in the immediate and building for the future. Sorry. And for the 2022 season, Centennial Little League saw a 74% growth in the number of girls who play baseball. So some great on the ground experience to contribute to the conversation. So welcome to Sean, and welcome to all three of you. It's fantastic to have time with you. I've long been an admirer of so much of your work, so we're going to look forward to diving in and learning a bit more today. So we're going to lead off the conversation. Natasha, I think I'll maybe start with you. Given that Canadian Women's Sport is sort of the national body that's really supporting women and girls' participation in sport and physical activity at all and across all sort of levels, really interested for you to tell us a little bit more about you, about Canadian Women in Sport, and then dive into our first question of why is female participation in sports so important?
Awesome. That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. Again, I'm speaking from Toronto, Treaty 13, and my pronouns are she, her. So I'm the marketing communication coordinator here at Canadian Women in Sport. For those that maybe aren't aware of the organization, we work with NSOs, so national sport organizations, provincial sport organizations, and also organizations at the community grassroots level, such as many people probably here today. And what we do is, with programs and workshops and presentations, we really try to get organizations to basically identify where they are in the gender equity journey and help them get to where they want to be. So for some bigger organizations, NSO levels, that can be more in-depth month-long programs. But depending on the resources available, the people power that's available, we also provide resources such as e-learning modules to sport leaders and volunteer community members themselves that are just in the beginnings of their gender equity journey. We do a lot of work in terms of the government sphere, so a lot of behind the scenes work, advocating for women and girls, and budget and work from Sport Canada and the Canadian government. And then when we get those funds, we work to distribute that either through our programs or in forms of grants, such as our Spotlight grant that's open now to organizations such as yourselves to continue the great work that's already happening on the ground. So to get to the question on why is participation for girls so important, we know that sport is the most prevalent extracurricular and organized activity for adolescents in Canada. And in some of the research that Canadian Women's Sport has done, which has gone back and been our Rally report, we recently last year had a COVID report. And we'll also be having a new edition of the Rally report looking, post-COVID, what the numbers look like. But really a few identifying areas for what girls identified of why they participate and benefit from sport was physical health, the fun aspect, social and mental health and well-being. There's obviously many other things that they identified on reasons why they were interested and did participate in sport, but those were some of the top aspects. And so when we're looking at, beyond sport, because we know that sport and society intertwines in many different things, and I'm sure we've seen the news lately, but we know that sport has many benefits outside of just physical health and mental health. But focusing on those two, if we look at how sport and society intertwine, if a good percentage of the population of, girls and women stop participating in sport, that will have an impact on our healthcare system, right? If the physical health and the mental health activities that they're able to do are not serving them or are no longer serving them, or they choose to not participate because they don't feel welcome, that will have an impact in society and our healthcare system. And also when we're looking forward and we're looking at leaders in the sport system, which a lot of you are here today, one, we want to encourage, allies who are supportive of gender equity to continue to take up leadership roles, like many people here. But we also want to ensure that there's that diversity of women and girls who had played sport in key leadership roles, whether that's CEOs, executive directors, etc. So if we have less girls participating at early ages, we're losing that pool as we go along the line up to the top levels, whether that's in grassroots, community organization or a national organization. We're losing access to the amount of, women that will be available or will be interested or feel like they belong in board member roles, and executive director and other key leadership roles that are the decision makers and that are the people that are really signing the checks and creating the pathway of where organizations want to go. I hope that answered the question, but I'll leave it there because I know the other people on the platform have some great insights as well.
Thanks, Natasha. And I'm sure we'll dive into several of those aspects as we go through the additional questions today. Lindsay, let's go to you next. And again, kind of sharing a little bit about yourself, the organization, and then the question around why it's so important for girls to be involved in sport.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm also coming to you from Edmonton in Treaty 6. And I think the In Motion Network, we focus on sport, physical activity, and recreation, and getting girls and women involved. And in our role primarily ends up being a connector of organizations to support others to develop programs with resources, maybe supporting information that's coming down from Canadian Women in Sport. And then we also provide a small amount of grant funding to support programs to try pilots or use some of our structures for programs that we've developed to give opportunities for girls and women to try to participate in different physical activities, sports, and recreation opportunities. And we really come from a perspective of participation and trying to get a wide variety of girls involved from all different backgrounds in trying to provide access and getting them to overcome the barriers that might prohibit them from participating. And so we work a lot with a variety of organizations. And I think to answer your question, I wanted to kind of focus a little bit on the pandemic because quite a few of our organizations have talked about how there were already so many barriers for participation for girls, and then the pandemic kind of just added to that. So because participation often declines after the age of 12 or around puberty for girls, and because there was 2 years where some girls were not able to participate in a sport or with a team, they may have not had any opportunities. And I always think of my daughter who's in this age range where in grade 6, she started the pandemic and now she's in grade 9. When I asked her last year if she wanted to try out for volleyball, she's like, well, no, I can't. I haven't done that. And those girls played club all through the pandemic and I can't do that now. So I think one of the things that I really like to see is some of those confidence builders, self-esteem, being willing to participate, try new things, the teamwork, all those sorts of byproducts that come from being involved in sport and physical activity, which I think are really important. And like Natasha mentioned, those lead into skills that you develop as an adult that might support you with your family or in the workplace, or whether you choose to play activities or pursue other sport opportunities later in life. So just to kind of touch on that. Thanks.
Super. Again, I know we're going to dive into some more of those pieces as we go through. So Sean, now I'm going to turn it to you, invite you to share a little bit more about you, about Centennial Little League, and also about why girls' participation is so important and why you've been putting so much emphasis on it.
Sure. So I'm the president of Centennial Little League, and so that just means I get to run a volunteer organization of moms and dads who are trying to make sure sport's delivered for kids. It is always fun, as I'm sure everybody knows. What Centennial has done and realized is with respect to girls is that we didn't have a very high percentage of girls playing baseball. And there's a ton of historical reasons that we'll get into that on kind of what baseball has done. And so from a very particular reason, like all of the things that both Lindsay and Natasha said are the thought process that we went through as a board as we evaluated what we could do different. But really, why is it so important for us in a baseball specific measure is that our membership rates were, between, 8 and 15% girls. And the last time I checked, women were 49.8% of the world's population. So we've got a pretty big imbalance there that we had to change our focus to try to bring that back to a little bit more of an equitable level of participation. And so that's really driven all of what we're doing. Baseball is unique from some other sports. Other sports have a little bit more gender equity in them than say baseball does, but that's kind of our focus on why the participation is so important, in addition to everything that both Lindsay and Natasha said.
Yeah, let's stay on you, Sean, because I'm curious sort of in having that look and realizing that was the discrepancy. What were some of the barriers that you felt were being put up to girls participating in your sport, or maybe even more broadly in sport, depending on sort of where you feel you can speak to?
Yeah, I feel most comfortable just speaking about baseball. So in our situation in Little League Baseball, girls actually were not allowed to participate in Little League Baseball until about either 72 or 74. Reports I read are slightly different until they lost a court case in the United States. So, and then what Little League did was they actually then went, okay, we'll create a softball division and we'll make all girls go there, which I don't know which one is worse from my perspective, because softball and baseball are similar, but they're not the same. And so we've always, since, prior to the 1972-74, girls couldn't play. And then after that, they were pushed mostly towards softball. And so we had that stigma even today where like, oh, I'm a girl, I need to play softball. And that doesn't exist. There are a good core group of girls who prefer baseball over softball. And so, that's, the number one barrier with respect to baseball. The kind of the second barrier in our perspective. So we have always, since forever, well, not forever, but for quite some time, have had girls play. But their retention rates, as I call it, are coming back year after year, were drastically different than boys. And so that really led us down the path of some of the stuff from, Canadian Women in Sport and understanding how girls get to a positive sport experience differently than boys, and understanding what we had to change in order to allow girls to feel socially accepted and then provide effort and then provide performances. That's their positive sport experience cycle. And that is fundamentally just changing how coaches coach. Right. We found that coaches, especially with volunteer coaches coach how they were coached. And so we had to provide resources and help to help reframe that for our coaches to understand that. So those are kind of the two major barriers that we've had here that we've been kind of attacking over the last little while.
Okay. I'm sure that was a really rich experience to go through and try and navigate. Like, how do you piece that together when these are all probably very busy volunteers that are with lots of other things on their plates? So I'll be curious to kind of come back to you on a question around sort of capacity and how we do this to move it forward. But I'm going to go to Lindsay next to just think about that same question in terms of what are some of those barriers that sport's putting up to hindering girls' participation.
Yeah, and I think just kind of echoing what Sean started, I know, like I said, my background is more general around physical activity and working with sports, and often sport organizations are unsure, like, where do we get these girls come from? Are girls just going to walk up and decide, yeah, I'm going to play this specific sport? And so what does it look like to encourage those opportunities, to make them welcoming, and think about where these girls are going to come from? And so I know there's been quite a few sport organizations that we've worked with that have really looked at how they can create more opportunities for entry level into their sport organization. So I know the one example that we've worked with quite a few times is through Athletics Alberta and their Mini Legend program, where they worked with somebody that had like a teaching background to develop a physical literacy-based program so that they could go into schools and they could go into community-based programs and try to create interest around learning some of the basic skills that might lead you to maybe an athletics opportunity later in life, but providing participation opportunities, a variety of skill development, having everybody being able to access and have fun through a program that might lead you to a place where you might choose that sport. But if you don't, you're still developing skills that might lead you to a different sport or activity. So I think that some of those barriers are in place, and because often sports are unsure, where do we start? How do we bring in the girls? So just wanted to share one example. And I know there's lots of other sport organizations that have done this, or they've created these introductory based programs that can kind of help with that barrier around skill development so that girls feel comfortable joining and learning and deciding if they like it before they sign up.
Oh, I love that. I have a little sidebar story about multi-sport program, and that's now led my daughter down the path of hockey, which we never actually would have probably put her in, but because she got a couple of introductory sessions and started to get a taste for it and felt like it was something she would enjoy, then here we are now, hockey parents. All right, Natasha, we're going to go to you with that same question.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And so already great points have been made by Lindsay and Sean. So I'll try not to double back on what they've already said. Um, but just looking at sort of a research lens, one of the biggest barriers that girls identified was access to sport. So Lindsay kind of touched on that as well. So that includes lack of time, availability, awareness of the specific sport, the location of proximity of where it is close to home. And so I think for a lot of girls identified in that group of, the 6 to 18 age, access was the biggest one. And then following that, the big ones were quality and alternatives, and of course, cost, which we know transcends. That's just a factor in sport, especially in specific sports, the cost of equipment, depending on the certain facilities that are needed. But those were some of the big things identified and why girls were not participating in sport while they were dropping out of sport. But an interesting lens I wanted to look at was the intersectional approach to Black, Indigenous, and women and girls of color on their specific barriers to sport, just because their experiences are different than others' experiences when playing sport. And so some of those barriers included stereotyping and compounded race and gender discrimination. So like identifying that there's different stereotypes towards different community groups, lack of provision of sport and recreational spaces for, women only to play, racism and Islamophobia, and then limited accommodations for childcare and family obligations. Again, as I mentioned, proximity to home, etc. But a really positive example, kind of on the flip side to some of these barriers to sports, are some great programs that are already happening in community spaces. Two, for example, one is Hijabi Ballers. It's for Muslim women based in Toronto that want to play basketball in women-only spaces. And that was created by a friend of mine and someone that worked in the rugby community that saw that there was a need to get more Muslim women and girls involved in sport and created that opportunity. And then another example of some great work happening in community level is, in Ontario, there's a rugby organization for women where they have childcare available on weekends for rugby matches and rugby tournaments, which, a few years ago was like a pretty big thing. It wasn't really common place in a lot of the sports that were happening at the recreational adult level. So although there are barriers to sport, it's important to acknowledge these, identify and look to other groups that are already doing that great work or have blueprints set in place so that other organizations can replicate it and take those learnings and implement them and how they work best in their own way for their organization.
Awesome. Thank you. I love those examples and being able to kind of point to some, I'm going to say, promising practices that are in our communities that we can all learn from. And yeah, being able to actually kind of capture like what worked, what didn't. And that's part of why we have Sean here today to sort of share some of their lessons learned as well. Because I'm sure for many of us on the call, that try and fail, it's like, okay, how do we fail forward fast so we can keep building and learning together? So what do sport clubs need to be kind of thinking about in order to recruit, retain girls in their sport programs? And maybe Natasha, will just stay on you because you pointed to a couple of things that felt like they would tie to this question.
Yeah, sure. That sounds great. So I think a few things, and this relates to the data I was pulling basically and talking about the barriers to sport. That was our specific, the BIPOC experiences of women and girls in sport. And although, it presented some, sometimes harsh and sometimes unfortunate data on like the barriers that are faced and the experiences people had, it also reflected and worked with researchers and community sport leaders on, okay, but now how do we actually improve those sport experiences? So I think for sports clubs and, in taking those first steps, whether you're creating a girls only program or you're just really taking that first step, is, developing girls only or racial or ethnic exclusive sporting spaces. So identifying, are people in a bit, and going back into identifying is also data collection. So are you reaching out and asking those in your community or those who maybe didn't return to sport, and also those who are returning to sport and asking, why do you keep coming back? What are you enjoying? What would you like to see different? And then also trying to reach out to those who didn't return and getting those experiences. And although, that sense of and getting negative feedback can sometimes, hurt, especially when you're working to do the right thing, those are really just as important as the positive feedback that you're going to get in order to make those steps forward. And then also really an important one is if we're looking to create, whether it's programs or opportunities for whatever community you're looking at, whether it's girls, whether it's Black girls, whether it's Indigenous girls, etc., is that we can't make things for people without them being in that development process. So, whether it's bringing the girls in and having, a pizza party and a survey and inviting to get their feedback in a more conversational way, whether that's also talking to parents or bringing in community sport leaders, or talking to other organizations that have had success. It's really about gathering that information and making sure that they're integral and a part of the process from the beginning, so that once the program's built, you don't have to go back and backtrack and be like, oh, these were areas that we missed or didn't think of, but you have someone with that lived experience and lens in the beginning of your process. So again, this can range from creating a whole new program to, maybe you're revamping a program, or maybe you're looking to create some specific coach education or education for some of the leaders in the community or in the club that you're currently working at. So I'll leave it there. I've thrown a few things in that answer.
Yeah, those are great. I also wanted to just point out that Kevin put in the chat a list of resources, and some of them have been referenced in different ways already in this conversation. I know we'll be intentional about referencing some of them as we go forward, but that link will take you to a listing of resources that can be really supportive for this journey of how to better include and support girls and women in our sport environments. So Sean, let's go to you on the same question around sort of that. What were you thinking about? What were you working on to recruit and retain girls in the baseball community as you kind of took this on and really intentionally started to build this out?
Yeah, what we really focused on to start was we needed a champion of the program and the champion of our initiatives. And so initially that was, it started with a couple of moms who approached us about trying to do some more things. And that led to then me taking on the mantle. And then we've also elevated one step further where we added a new board position this year for VP of Girls Baseball. And we brought on a female in that role to champion that program, so that it's not just me championing it. And that champion, in our case, as a volunteer-run organization, that role has really been taking all of the fantastic information that Canadian Women in Sport and in Motion and everybody has in the space, and trying to distill it down in very small, important bites that our volunteers who maybe don't have, 10 hours to sit through a course or an hour to read through a long article, taking that and distilling it down on why we do these important things and how we can do them differently. So, in that was really, kind of step one for us. And number two was it was really important to talk to others. So in baseball alone, there was an organization at Edmonton Community Park, and I talked endlessly with Tully, who's the president of there, and we unabashedly stole everything he did that worked. Right. And I will gladly do that and take the stuff that worked and learn from the stuff that maybe didn't. And so those are kind of two of the big things. And then the third thing is, that champion being able to distill down why we want to do things differently and how we can do it differently for our volunteers. And then there's a question about creating separate girls teams or integrating with the boys teams. We do both. At the moment where our program is, we had 3 all-girls teams, one in each different age group this year. We had one the previous year, so there's growth there. But we also have girls who choose to participate in mixed gender teams as well too. And we give them during the registration process the ability to tell us which way they want to go. And we highlight reasons why certain choices may be better for certain girls. And we, once again, stole all that from Canadian Women in Sport mostly. On that value of an all girls experience to some girls. So that's kind of what we focused on as a sport club and volunteer run. I mean, we do have the challenge of it's, we're doing this in cracks of time. So being able to distill it down and bring, little nuggets that will really help grow the program.
Yeah, super. Thanks so much for those really kind of tangible pieces of how you began and what you're focusing on. Lindsay, how about you? What do you think sport clubs need to be thinking about to recruit and retain girls?
Well, I think just to echo what Sean was talking about, it's it's not something that you need to know or have to have all the expertise around. And there's lots of other groups and organizations that have done some of this work that you can lean on for support. I think it's really important to understand how different girls like to participate in physical activity. And I think that just comes down to really thinking about the participant in general and really providing opportunities where girls might thrive. So we know that's linked a lot to like social interactions and having friend groups. And so that might look a little bit different in terms of programming. I think too, also, when we're talking about some of the groups that we've worked with and some of the sport organizations that we support, they often have wonderful coaches with so much knowledge and experience, but maybe they haven't run girls only programming before. So one of the strategies that we've often done as well is that because we're bridging community organizations often with sport organizations, we had a project that we did recently with Alberta Triathlon and Free Play for Kids, where we were able to actually have the Free Play for Kids leaders who are trained, who know those girls, who have kind of a relationship already, and then bringing in the sport organization with the sport expertise, where they were allowed to work or supported to kind of work together and share so that the coach could see how the leader was interacting with those girls, and then vice versa. So really kind of leaning on other experts who maybe are more focused around inclusion or participation, and seeing how they may be leading girls through activities that you could pull and use within your sporting context. Especially with this project, we were looking at sports that are, or triathlon, which is quite intense. So how do you break down that activity to make it approachable for girls who maybe have never participated in one of the events, let alone 3 distinct events? So really leaning on different partnerships and opportunities to kind of connect experts that might be able to support you. I often find that when I'm watching someone else lead a program, I will take some of those tips and tricks with me. So if you have an opportunity to kind of shadow or mentor someone through that, I think that's also a great opportunity.
Nice. And that's another great example. So thanks for that, Lindsay. This was referenced a little bit earlier. I think Sean referenced it around sort of how girls participate and look for sport experiences in a different way than boys do. And so Natasha, I want to kind of flip to you because I know that's a piece that came from Canadian Women in Sport, but I would love for you to just share that with the audience, and then sort of also how you're mobilizing that out to the community so they can learn more about that.
Yeah, of course. So yes, and thanks, Sean, for teeing that up and bringing that up for me. But in one of our research publications that we looked at, it compared and it collected information both from girls and from boys on, what enticed them and what retained them in sport. So for boys, the top 4 and how it moved down, it was effort, then performance, then social acceptance, and then a positive, and that equaled a positive sport experience for them. For girls, it was social acceptance, effort, performance, and then that created a whole, positive sport experience for them. And so you probably heard us, all 3 of us, talking about social and social acceptance, but that really is the big indicator and the big draw for girls to participate in sport. And so, that is something important when organizations are looking to create girls only programming. It doesn't necessarily work just to copy paste what had been done for the boys. Yes, certain aspects for sure. But if we're looking at that pathway on what entices girls to get into sport and what retains them in sport, it's really focusing on that social acceptance and how their experience is when they're participating in sport. And so I think the second part of your question was, how can this information get to the masses and get to organizations like Sean's organization and the many others that will be here today? These are, of course, all available on our website, both, again, and we realize that sometimes publications for volunteers and for community grass level sports, you don't have a lot of time. Let's be honest, not a lot of time. There's not always the most people power, and you don't want to go through, a full 60-page publication. But we also have these in more digestible formats in, a 1 to 2 page PDF or picture format that gives you basically the big nuggets and the big numbers and some of the recommendations that come from whether it's this publication specifically or other publications that are looking and targeted towards gender equity in sport. So I think those are probably in the resources as well, but in the follow-up, and of course, information for later, that's something you can always follow up with Canadian Women in Sport, and that can be provided to you. And our publications are free of cost, just so that we can get that information out to the sector. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was super. Thanks, Natasha. One of the references I wanted to make, which is on the resource list, is the Keeping Girls in Sport e-learning module, which takes about an hour to an hour and a half to complete and talks through that cycle of girls looking for social acceptance as a primary piece of their sport involvement. And so that's a really powerful module, and one that I certainly put out to our community. And we do run a girls multi-sport program here in Victoria that we actually started in the thick of the pandemic, recognizing that girls had lost opportunities at a disproportionate rate. And all of our leaders need to go through that, as well as the sports that we partner with, in order to create that foundation of understanding. And then we actually do a bit of a debrief, talking about how are you actually going to bring this to life in your program, so that it's sort of the learning and then the tangible, like, what are we going to do to move this from theoretical to practical? So that's going to be our next question, is thinking about what do sport organizations need to do to move from some of the learnings around this space to actually doing this on the ground. So Lindsay, I'm going to lead off with you this time.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that you can do. And I think Sean mentioned it earlier, trying different things, piloting different projects is really important. Again, like I mentioned before, planning to include from the beginning, no matter what your program is always a great strategy. So if you're really looking at some of those concepts around how everyone can be involved and engaged from the beginning, that can help with your planning and projects. So we, like I said, In Motion Network likes to encourage a lot of pilot projects. So, learn to try it opportunities, bring a friend, multi-sport opportunities, providing safe environments, positive social environments within your programming. I would also encourage groups to seek different resources and tools that are available for coaches and administrators to learn more how to best suit girls. And I know that there's a couple examples that we'll also share later, but also look outside of the sporting sector. So there's lots of work being done within schools or recreation, or maybe other areas that you might be able to pull from, especially around the needs of girls, that might be more specific to how to include them. And then we always try to encourage girls being involved in the planning and implementation of the programming, whether that includes what activities do you want to try? Do you want to try to lead a part of this program? How do you feel about the activities that we've been doing? So providing opportunities for them to reflect on either the activities or how the program works. They will often tell you, if you create that positive environment, exactly what they're looking for. And they will also, I know, again, I always reference my daughter, but when she's asked these things, she'll come home and tell me. Like, it's not even about the activity, it's about the fact that someone asked her what she wanted to do and how much she appreciates that. And then also looking to see what else you can do within your organizations beyond supporting the girls themselves. Who are other female role models as volunteers, as leadership? How are you including, kind of building girls and women involved in your organization beyond just the programming?
Super. Thank you for that. Sean, let's go to you. How we move from theoretical to practical. And I know you've given us a couple of examples already, but would love for you to kind of build on that.
Yeah, I hope I don't repeat myself too much, but our first step on going from theoretical to practical was being able to sell the why. That was the biggest sell point, getting everybody in our membership understanding why we needed to do something different. Because we already took girls' registration and we already had that, but we had about a 20% retention rate year over year, and that's an atrocious number. And from our first all girls team, the first year we had one, the following year our retention rate last year was 40%. Because 80% of that one team of all girls came back, right? And so that value, like, I'm really looking forward to see what our numbers head into as we head into our registration for next year in December, and seeing where that goes. So understanding the why of trying to get not just more girls playing, but more girls playing and staying, right? So selling that part of the why was really important because, like I said, we were already, the mindset of, well, girls can already play. Why do you have to do something different? And like I said, the big part of that why is that whole positive sport experience cycle that came from Canadian women in sport. I put that on a screen and that sold itself, right? I mean, we all sit there and go, we know boys and girls are different, but sometimes we forget how different they can be inside, not just outside. Um, the next biggest thing to go from theoretical to practical is just not be scared to make mistakes and make commitments to things and roll with it. And some of that was, we as a board made some financial investments into it where we took on a couple of projects where we could have lost significant money in holding some stuff, but we've turned out okay on the other side because, we made the decision to hold an all girls clinic last year in May. We were going to be ecstatic if we had 50 girls sign up. We had 112, and it was floored. And then the Blue Jays came out in the summertime and ran a girls clinic and had 90 girls. And they said they hold that camp in Toronto, they'll get 10. And so, don't be scared to make those mistakes, and do that and put it together and, really promote your successes. Maybe don't promote your mistakes quite as much, but use social media to market it and just continue that message. We also created a secondary social media channels to highlight this. So it wasn't just about what was happening within our association borders. We made it about kind of everything in it. It's Girls with Game YYC. And so we do all of our girls promotion and we promote other girls programs, whether it's baseball or not. We try to do all of that. And then another thing to go from theoretical is just to provide some really small bite-sized morsels for your coaches. In our case, as volunteer coaches, we took a lot of the Canadian women in sport information we had, distilled some of that down. We also took, there's a great document from Nike, the Nike Made to Play. We unabashedly stole some really, really small nuggets from that for coaches to kind of help them reframe. As I said before, coaches coach how they were coached generally, especially volunteer coaches who don't go through a lot of specialized training. And so we were able to provide some information to help reframe the focus and stuff for those coaches and have them understand a why in the practical sense we need to do things differently on the baseball diamond, not just why we should do other things different. So it's a lot of why in our case on going there, but that's kind of was our road over the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. There's a question in the chat about, or a comment, sorry, around having male and female coaches. And so I'm just curious as well on your approach to that, Sean.
Yeah, we really try to ensure that we prefer to have females in the roles attached to promoting this program. Unfortunately, sorry, we are beholden to whichever mom and dad holds up their hand and wants to coach. And it doesn't always align that we get, mom wants to coach the daughter. And so we do what we can, but we do have several women coaches. And the funny part is I think most of them have boys. So they're all coaching boys teams. So we try to line that up. We did on the clinic we held and some clinics we're going to hold this year, very consciously only had female coaches. Just to try to reiterate that. And we also, as an organization, look beyond coaches. We're looking at our umpires, trying to encourage umpires, females to come into the umpiring because that is woefully underrepresented. And we, really try to make sure that our board composition and our board and key role composition is really close to that 50-50 composition as well, too, which is a challenge because it's volunteer who holds the hand up and wants to put in the extra work. So, but we do kind of make some decisions that way. Hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thanks, John. Natasha, let's go to you. Kind of along the same question around that theoretical to practical. And I know Canadian women's sport is very intentionally trying to invest in supporting some clubs to move along this track. So tell us a little bit about what you think around that space.
Yeah, and that's a great segue actually. So we had historically, and our strongest connections had been at the national sport level. And so we've been working very hard to bridge those connections at the provincial and territorial level and at the community level, because community coaches, community sport leaders, community sport is where the biggest population of athletes are playing at, right? Not everyone's going to be an Olympian, but do we want people to continue their physical activity in the long-term athlete development plan for the rest of their life? Of course we do. So we know it's really important to bridge that gap and to work with organizations that might be on here, such as yourselves. And so some of the ways that we do that is through specific programs. So we talked a little bit about, there's e-learning available, but there's also programs that are targeted towards, provincial sport organizations and community grassroots-based organizations, such as the Same Game Challenge. I'll use this as an example, and then I'll dive back into the question. But how we do that is we work with, organizations. In our current cohort, we work with 40 organizations across the country. We provide them with an $1,000 honorarium because obviously these organizations are already interested and are already doing some work towards gender equity, but, maybe don't have the finances to fully launch that pilot project, that program, that coaching, seminar, workshop, whatever it may be, off the ground. And then basically we work with that organization, provide them with a Same Game coach, and they go through a 6-month program where not only are they walking through and going through the gender equity lens e-learning module, which takes them through specific steps such as data collection and learning, what your membership looks like. But it also allows them to collaborate with the other 39, organizations that are a part of that cohort every few weeks and talk about, how far have you moved along in the process? Have you had to take a step back? What are some successes? What are maybe some shortfalls that you've had? And to share those. And again, I think that's probably one of the biggest things all three of us had talked about, but like that collaboration transcends the level of sport, transcends the type of sport, because there's learnings that we can take, whether you're rugby or baseball or softball, that can be useful into your sport. And it doesn't have to necessarily, all align, but there's certain nuggets that people can take that are really useful. And so we wanted to create that community network sharing atmosphere within the program. And then getting back to the, theoretical to practical, I think, Lindsay and Sean already had some fantastic points, so I won't, take up too much of the air and go over those. But I think really it's senior leadership buy-in and board buy-in, because, and Sean's organization is a great example. Someone came with an idea and saw an opening, and the leadership team, and Sean included, was like, yes, okay, let's go with it. But that doesn't necessarily happen at all organizations. So it's definitely making sure that the people that, are the ones to give the go ahead on participating in a program by a third party organization, or, committing to starting a pilot program or project, is really having that senior leadership board member buy-in, or else it's not going to go anywhere. And sometimes that's easier said than done, of course. I definitely respect that. But, a way of starting that is in the theoretical, is collecting the data and identifying where some of the gaps are, and looking forward to where there's some opportunity to make some change and to not even just make, which is great, social justice change, but also make change on, registrations are low, where are the gaps within that? So I'll stop there because I threw a lot in there, and Lindsay and Sean had touched on some great points already.
Yeah, and I'll maybe invite Lindsay or Sean if you want to jump in on that. One of the pieces that struck me as you were talking about data, Natasha, was just thinking about like data at all levels of the organization, right? And how do you set targets, not just for registrations and retention, but also for leadership and board and coaching. And Sean was touching a little bit on their coaching and sort of how that evolves. So how do we be intentional about some of those pieces as we go forward? But I'll open it up for any of you to weigh in.
I think, leadership is an area that InMotion Network also is looking at supporting women at all levels. And I think, Sean touched on a few things too. We're often have a lot of expectations on volunteers who are volunteering for boards, who are volunteering as coaches, who are volunteering because their kids are there. And how do we support them the best we can when we have these expectations on them leading these programs, and you have to do this training, and so I think some things that we're really looking at InMotion, and I know that we really try to do within our board, is really think about the same kind of strategies that I mentioned before, is asking, what do you need to be here? How can we support you? to be a volunteer. How does that look different for you in your life? And sometimes that means that, for us and our board, since COVID, it's actually been preferred to meet online all the time because of the time it took to travel, to be away from the family. We've had some new moms on our board that have been able to have their children there with them while they're on a call and be on mute without a video on. So, ask those questions about how you can better support women to be involved in your organization. And sometimes the changes that you have to make are not huge. Childcare, maybe there might be some support there. It might be the time of the meeting. It might be right after work. It might be at lunch. So how can you support women to be involved in your organization at different levels by changing some small administration things that might bring them in to be easier supported?
I want to add one comment that's just comes from a slightly different angle. Because of what we've done within our borders, and some of our neighboring and other associations in Calgary have seen what we do, I quite regularly get approached, how do I get my association to do what you're doing? And I'm not sure everybody likes the answer when I give it to them, because the first one is ask, contact your board and ask. But the best one is hold your hand up and be that champion for that initiative. And so if this is something that is important to you, you can't assume that the existing board or core volunteer base that's running your local sport association is as engaged and interested in this. You have to be willing to hold your hand up and drive that, and say, I'm willing to take that on and help for not just my kid, but all the kids in our area. And I'm not sure that answer is always very well received by a lot of people, because it asks people to stick their neck out and get uncomfortable. But that's the key there. You just have to find the people who are passionate about it and make sure that they're involved in your program and process in as many ways that you can. And when in doubt, ask people who are already busy, because they always seem to find time to add more.
I love it. I love the championing and getting people involved. So think about, in our kind of final-ish questions, and encouraging the audience to dive in and ask us any questions that are popping up for you. Thinking about, in each of your roles, and Sean actually just gave us a really tangible piece of advice, but what would those pieces of advice be for people who are getting started in this? Where do you start? How do you kind of start to bring it to life when there's lots out there and lots of other conflicting priorities? So, Natasha, why don't we begin with you?
It's a big question. That's a good question, though. Where do you start? I feel like a broken record, but there's just been a lot of juicy stuff that's been shared here. But actually, before I say that, I'll say we're not where we want to be completely. There's still a long way to go for gender equity in sport. However, there's a lot more resources, and there's recently some big funding that has come out to support sport organizations at all levels that are doing gender equity work. And so, although it might be daunting and yes, time consuming, it is important work. And it feels like there's more resources available in terms of publications and data to present to your board on why this is important, but also funding. Example is Community Sport for All from the government just gave away millions of dollars to a bunch of organizations, Canadian Women in Sport being one, Participation is another. There's quite a few others, and they have all these buckets of funding to give out. Now, Canadian Women in Sports is specific to women and girls and of specific communities, but there's definitely more coming that way, and that's where it seems to be where things are trending. So I think that's exciting. But really, to start is the buy-in, and what Sean said is someone being the one to stick up their hand and identifying that this is something that we should get on board for. This is a gap that we've identified. Hopefully you'd be willing to lead it, or someone's willing to lead it and is willing to work with the board or senior leadership to get that off the ground. So I think for me, at least, that's usually when we're talking to organizations, is even in some of our programs, is we don't even ask for, do you have one person that's available to start and, come to meetings? Do you have two people? Because sometimes these pilot projects or programs are just the getting into your gender equity journey, it's a lot for one person. And so having someone that you can rely on and lean on and, you know, share the knowledge with and kind of be partners in this journey is really important at organizations. So I digress. That's what my recommendation.
No, that was great. And I mean, one of the things I've certainly appreciated the last few years, because I've been doing gender equity in sport work, I feel like my entire career. I think it was kind of one of the first areas of diversity and inclusion that I started to dive into very early in my career. But the data that Canadian Women in Sport has been putting out the last few years, both kind of leadership data at the NSO level and then participant data, has been so helpful to be able to kind of tell the story and make the case. And in fact, I just presented about 2 weeks ago to one of the boards that I'm on locally about what that data was, because we were having a conversation around gender equity. So it definitely helps make the case and support sort of where you want to go. We have a question in the chat. Is there a source for these available funds to help us create a solid campaign for generating more interest? I'm not totally clear on that question. There is if it's the Community Sport for All funds, maybe Natasha can put a link in the chat for that grant application, because I think I just saw that come out from you folks in the last couple of days. But there's many of similar grants, as Natasha referenced, coming out right now. Canadian Parks and Recreation just launched theirs last week. So there's definitely funds available. But Will, I don't know if that answers your question. So if it doesn't, please feel free to clarify, and then we can keep navigating.
Andrea, apologies. Do you mind if I interject?
No, please.
On the link I actually just put in, we've also included all the other organizations that have also received funding. So depending on, you know, what you're doing, and maybe that hopefully answers the question a bit, there's a list of all the other organizations that received Community Sport for All funding. So, you know, it might be different. You might be going to someone different for a school, or if you're a municipality, or Women and Girls in Sport, but I would suggest just scrolling to the bottom and checking that out.
Super, great addition. Thanks, Natasha. Okay, Lindsay, let's go to you next in terms of what are some of those steps that you think folks should be taking to move this work forward?
I think I kind of outlined some already, but I think one thing that I just wanted to mention is, you know, working in this world of girls and women in sport, it's often the women that come to these meetings that are shouldering a lot of the work around this. So it's great to hear some of the things that Sean has done and some of the support he's given as an ally to get more girls involved in his organization. So I think just encouraging you to look for other allies and not only shoulder all this work as a woman working in your organization. And it's been great in Alberta. I've worked in this sector in Alberta my whole career, and you know, there's more executive directors for sport organizations and people working on projects around women and girls. So it's great to see all these opportunities come forward. So I would just continue everyone to work with partnerships and work with allies. And we know all the benefits of having more girls and women involved in sport, and keep, you know, trying projects and seeing what you can do to make it live best within your means in sport and activity.
Thanks, Lindsay. How about you, Sean?
I'll take another kind of more, you know, small sports association focus is that, you know, if you're here, you're interested in the topic and you've gone through the research and you realize you want to do something, you know, you need to choose what you're going to do. Just choose, just make a decision, commit to it, right? It's not hard, just make that commitment. You need to measure and keep metrics to see if you're being successful, right? Are you actually making a change, or are you just spinning your wheels in the mud? So that data aspect that you talked about, Andrea, just on a smaller level there. And then the third thing that I think is the absolute most important, because we all have limited budgets, make sure that your marketing lines up with your core values and what you're trying to actually deliver. If you're marketing something great and grandiose and you're not delivering it, you're failing everybody. So those are kind of the three areas that I would say, if you're going to do something, choose to start and follow those paths.
I actually heard a few more than that, so I just jotted them down for folks to take away. So that was awesome. Thank you to each of you for sharing and kind of connecting with what each other is doing along this journey. And I love that we continue to build community around some of these topics and thinking about how we can all be intertwined. And, you know, Sean's referencing using resources that Natasha's organization's putting out and Lindsay's organization's putting out. And now I'm sure both of them will be coming back to Sean to say, hey, we're thinking of this. What do you think? So hopefully for each of you that have been in the audience today, you can also do the same. And we have an incredible opportunity with this remote platform as we exit the stage to go out and be in community with each other at the tables. So would encourage you to do so and spend a few minutes just meeting some of the other folks that are here, maybe diving into a couple of the discussion areas that we've surfaced today. But I really just want to thank Sean and Natasha and Lindsay for being here and for sharing, and for Kids Sport for hosting this incredible series, and the Flames Foundation for their support in doing so. So we're going to wrap up. I'm just going to share our next session up on the screen, which is coming up on November 2nd. We have our Newcomers in Sport session, and looking forward to kind of diving into that topic area and how, as sport leaders, you can be supporting newcomers in your program opportunities. And with that, we will move off the stage and into tables and welcome you to join us. We'll pop around the room and be part of the discussions. And thanks so much for being here, everyone. And thank you again to our incredible panelists.